All right, it is 6 p.m. and 5 seconds till 6:01 on what's today's date? It's at the 4th?
January 3rd.
January 3rd, 2022. Happy New Year to everyone, and we're going to go ahead and call the executive committee meeting to order. So
I'll do the official roll. Chris Valle.
Here.
Melanie Lebrecq.
Here.
Vic Christensen here. Christian Guzman. Not here at the moment.
All right.
So we do have a quorum, with 3 out of 4.
All right, and could you scroll down just a little? All right, so there's item number 1 out of the way. Item number 2 would be if there is any general public comment on non-agenda items. Now would be the time to raise your hand and let us hear you out. See, we have a solid half dozen attendees, but no requests for public comment at this time. All right, so let's move on to item 3. This is discussion and possible action in reference to attendees' ability to speak while not given the floor. Let me just lead off with this just in the broadest sense. I did just a little looking in terms of the functionality. I mean, obviously, if there's an in-person meeting, that's a different proposition entirely. But when we are hosted by Zoom, we do have the the ability to give and to, I guess, revoke permission to speak. And I don't know actually in a practical sense if that is an absolute block of that attendee's ability to enable their microphone or not. It seems that most of the time we've had issues if people have been permitted to speak and then it has not been they haven't been put back into attendees. So yeah, Melanie, go ahead. So you're muted.
When we did the town hall,
Mm-hmm.
For the police, the thing that we did,
Yeah,
there was a lot of from some of the attendees that kept when their hand was up, they were speaking and stuff. And so I discovered on there that there was a revoke. You could go click and revoke permission to speak. And what it does is it takes the mic away from them where they can't just automatically speak again. What happens is they go into where they have to raise their hand again, and then you have to click to allow them to speak again. So I think that would really be our best option from now on for the meetings, is to revoke the ability to speak on the attendees, and they'll have to just go back in the line and raise their hand again and not be able to chime in.
Yeah, I think, well, obviously, I think that's the way to go. And I think that's probably just a matter of having one or more of us cognizant of that at all times, so that if somebody doesn't catch it, someone else will. If we have multiple layers of coverage for that. Does that apply? What do you know what the functionality is with respect to panelists? Is that a
panelist? It doesn't. And unfortunately, whoever is the panelist is going to have to just abide by the rules of the Brown Act and formal meeting functions where you have to raise your hand and be called on.
And I think that's probably fine. I mean, hopefully now and going forward, we have panelists who either already do understand or can have explained to them that responsibility. And, I would say most of what we would experience so far, even this year, I would call it, incidental. There has been a little bit of habitual abuse, but for the most part, it hasn't really derailed our work. And I think if the people running the meetings are just more focused on making sure that is kept at a high priority, we should be okay. And we seem to be learning one way or another as we go along. Speaking of allowing people to talk, I see Craig and Diana. Does anybody know which order they hit with their hands up in?
Diana was first.
Okay, well, let me go ahead and let her in. Diana, go ahead and there you go.
Thanks. Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. I've tried to figure out how to revoke permission for an attendee, and I don't think I've been successful. So I would like to know how to do it.
Well, we can try tonight and do a little dry run and see if it works. So because again, I wasn't an option I knew existed in a lot,
I can
I've been-
guide you through it, Chris. What you do is you
I-
go
I
to your
just did it for
attendee
Diana.
panel thing. You go to your attendee panel thing and you highlight over it like over Diana.
Yeah.
And then when you highlight over it, then it'll say more.
Yeah.
When you click more,
Oh, it says remove permission to talk right there.
permission to speak.
Okay, and that's nothing you would have seen if you hadn't already given it to him, which is why I don't recognize it in the menu. That makes sense. Yeah, it's normally people just lower their hands and they go back into wherever. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, all right, so that's just something we're going to have to pay more attention to going forward, which is fine. It's a relatively easy way to address that. Craig, go ahead.
Okay, well, there's a few things that are wrong here. One is the public should not be debating the board. And that's what happened in that meeting and in various meetings, that all of a sudden, oh, we were interested in what this person has to say, so you let somebody debate the board. That's not how it's supposed to be. You have public comment in the beginning or public comment at the end, and that's it. This idea that the public can come on and debate the board, we're supposed to be debating each other. We shouldn't be going out to people of the public and coming in and going back and forth and debating with them. And that was the first mistake. It creates just an adversarial relationship. There is no, there's no provision in our bylaws or in Robert's Rules of Order of anything else that the public is supposed to be debating the board.
Well, I mean, that we obviously will double check to make sure, but yeah, I mean, I don't have a problem with that in principle. It's that this particular agenda item is not about the propriety of that action. It's about our sort of procedural control of the microphone. So the point is taken, we can follow up in that. And I think that might be something that, is worth asserting at the beginning of any particular board and stakeholder meeting. But the purpose of this item was to discuss basically just controlling the microphone access. But yeah, that is a good observation. So I'm going to go ahead and cue Pat up. Go ahead, Pat.
The third place where the public can speak is before the board takes action on an item. That's where the debate comes in with, you can call it debate or you can call it public comment on a matter when it's called before the board.
Yeah, and that makes sense because I mean, at least off the top of my head, I'm familiar with that. When someone makes that public comment, whether it's reference to an agenda item or not, we're not allowed to answer them. They make their statement and we acknowledge that and move on. I think sometimes we blur the lines between, points of clarification possibly and answering questions when that's appropriate. And honestly, I just think we lose a little bit of discipline and it does drift into a conversation / debate or whatever when it might not be procedurally appropriate, but doesn't seem unnatural in the context. But that's something worth again, if we're aware of it and remind ourselves, so we will be better off as we go forward. Craig, did you raise your hand again? Go ahead.
No, I didn't, but I was trying to make the point that it was a lot of the problem is because when you're recognizing people, it was recognizing people at times that weren't appropriate. Board members, not board members, but for people from the public to speak. They have a specific time to speak.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then I'll be honest, I'm not clear or current on precisely when that is in the standard kind of cycle of the parliamentary process. Go ahead, Victor.
There are two times, and I think this is what Pat was getting at. There are two times that is appropriate for public comment. There is one or two, if you count beginning and end, for non-agenda items. There is also the time when it is an agenda item at the time the agenda item is being heard. Now, whether you call it debate or not depends on how things go for that particular comment or item. But there is an appropriate time for the public to comment on an agenda item.
Right, well, and is that during what we would normally call discussion, or is it simply right after the item is presented? Because I know we're not really supposed to engage with them on that, like make their statement and we continue with our,
It's
and we
supposed to be after this item, if it's on an item, it's after that item is discussed. And also the way that our bylaws are, which I didn't realize, is stakeholders are supposed to be questioned first before board members. And I did not realize that, because Ray had always done it where board members ask the questions first on an agenda item, and then it was stakeholders. But the way that our bylaws read, it is supposed to be stakeholders first, or able to ask questions first, and then the board members come second.
so you're
I
saying
was
that
like,
the stakeholder comments, comments would come before our formal discussion phase? Is
right
that,
before board members discuss it.
okay,
yes.
well, all right. All right, so we see hands popping up here. I see Lori, and then I'll get Craig again. Hold on just a moment. Lori, go ahead.
Thank you, Chris. To my knowledge, Melanie is absolutely correct. So at public comment at the beginning, a stakeholder can speak and you're not supposed to comment or address that. When it's on an agenda item, yes, the rules say that the stakeholders speak first, but it's also my understanding, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that stakeholders would speak and then some board members can speak. A stakeholder can raise their hand again on that same agenda item. And just like we did in person, sometimes that would happen. So that's my understanding. I don't consider it a debate. I consider we're asking questions. We're trying to clarify things and work through whatever the motion being addressed. But Vic, do you know, can a stakeholder speak a second time after the board members have spoke?
I would have to look that up. I don't know off the top of my head.
All right, Craig, go ahead.
Okay, it's appropriate for, after a agenda item is put, that we get the public comment, and then we should be discussing it and voting on it. It shouldn't be a back and forth. We're not supposed to be debating the public. The thought that if they have to get clarification or anything like that, it isn't from public comment. We're supposed to hear their input and move on. If you've gone to any committee meetings when you go to the council, you say your piece, and they say then they go on and they do what they're going to do, and they have their discussion and vote. But I've never seen it where there was a back and forth between the public and a board or a committee.
Yeah, and I think you're, well, it sounds right. It makes sense, which means it's probably right. And I think what, just from my recollection, what seems to happen often is that because we will have, for instance, with presentation, we may have board members and stakeholders directing questions and answering and whatever. And I think that style just kind of essentially leaks over into the part of the agenda, which should be more structured. And I think it's worth kind of redoubling our efforts to make sure it follows that format. It's probably not going to prevent anyone from saying what they want to say or need to say. And at this point, putting a little bit more structure back in the mix, especially if that's what the rules dictate, then that's what we should do. Sorry. And is there any other, do we have any other comments or input on that topic? And hearing none. Vic, where are we on the? Oh, are these the notes that you're keeping? The minutes? Oh,
Sorry, I was closing it to go to the next, to go back to the agenda. Those were the input that I got from those who submitted any input
okay.
or, ideas, and
Can we go over
predominantly
those,
what we've
Vic?
already talked about, having to do with the control of the mic.
Okay.
Can we go over those, Vic? The ones that were the suggestions?
All right, hang on. I have to go back to it.
For
I
those
have
people
to
that can't
reshare
see,
because I
that's why I'm
clicked,
suggesting it is the people that can't see them.
Yeah.
uh, Okay, can you see it?
Not
Or
right
you
now.
See the agenda.
I still see the agenda.
Okay, then I'm gonna have to reshare. Excuse me, reshare.
Okay. There we go.
Okay, what, do you see them now?
Yeah, I see it.
Okay. So
And I see Christian's logging in.
all these here are, well, pretty much what I did is I just copied and pasted what people sent. I took out, I did a bit of grammar check and took out some things that might be identifying to the person who submitted them. But
Okay.
for the most part, I just copied and pasted. And these that I just highlighted are the ones that are pretty much in common from the different people who sent something in. And they all have to do with, you know, allowing and revoking the ability for an attendee to speak, which we've already talked about.
Yeah, this seems to reinforce what we just kind of figured out.
Right. Now, the rest of these are not all directly related to this particular topic, although some of them can be indirect. Some of them, which I think one person said would be good to have a separate meeting to go over some of these things, like going over the bylaws and the standing rules as far as how meetings should take place, going over how motions should be placed, parliamentary procedure type of things. But I left them in here just so you could see what the comments are.
Yeah. It seems like the kind of thing that we would normally work on or should work on at a retreat, like where we can just kind of get our act together, but it is good.
Separate from here because,
Right. Yeah.
you know, for two things. One, it's not an agenda item.
Right.
And two, it's not really related to controlling or preventing rather the outbursts and things like that.
Yeah, this is just good. This is just basic kind of
So,
boilerplate stuff.
you know, like it says at the top here, meeting protocol.
Yeah, a lot of these things are just kind of best practices for public meetings, really.
Yeah. But the main ones, I mean, and interspersed in there, there are a few things that you could say are having to do with the agenda item we're talking about.
Yeah, and, you know, there's overlap, obviously.
For the most part, it's these at the top.
Yeah. Okay. And so for anybody who's not able to see the screen, we'll go over these real quickly if I can summarize. Essentially, what the gist is, and these are 5 bullet points. Really, to boil it down, it's that we do what we discussed earlier in the agenda. That is, we have one or more of the officers paying attention to who has the ability to speak, and then to make sure to revoke that at the end of their turn, to lower their hand for them if it hasn't been lowered by the attendee. And, you know, really the throttle would be when someone is given permission to speak and asked to unmute, that the follow through for that stroke would be to make sure that they have their hand lowered and have it revoked. So it's really just a function that either myself or the secretary has been kind of covering at meetings, but it's really that, you know, it's a kind of an extension or the presidential function of running the meeting, and that whoever's deputized to help with those functions should just basically keep it in a couple of extra steps in mind to make sure that the, you know, the whole process of management is done thoroughly. And speaking of presidential function, Christian, you have anything to?
Hello, everyone. No, keep going. It sounds good.
Oakley dokley. All right. So I think, can we put this one to bed? Are we good? All right. Okay, so moving on to agenda item number 4, which is discussion and possible action in reference to standing committee reports reordering. And I interpret that to mean what order in the board and stakeholder meeting these things are presented.
Yes, this is something that I put in there, especially after the last meeting where there were some attendees in particular who were on the agenda, had their hand up, but we did not see them, and that's on us to make sure we see them too. But what I was thinking of is, since these meetings tend to go right to the wire, if not over, if we did cut them off, I was thinking we could reorder them so the same people, the same committees, and committees, mainly the standing committees, are not at the end every time. So what I was thinking is going from one meeting to the other, to the next, whoever is the last on the list, like I believe it's sustainability right now, would move up to be first. And then the next meeting, whoever's at the end, last, gets moved up to the top again. So that was just an idea that I had. If anybody else has any other ones, that's fine.
Well, this is something that, because of my participation with youth and outreach, which tend to be kind of, I don't know if they're alphabetical or how that was done, but I've noticed on several occasions running out of time and getting kind of the bum's rush as we're trying to get out the door. I don't know offhand if arbitrary rotation is, I mean, that would be one way to, I think that's a good basic concept. And sometimes I think maybe if a committee chair goes to the president, whoever runs the meeting, and says, I've got something super important that needs to get dealt with, maybe that's something we could, if that information is available for this meeting, for the agenda setting meeting, maybe we could take those special requests into account as well. But if whoever's building the document for the board and stakeholder meeting agenda wants to do that, to rotate those things through, I think, I don't think there would be any harm in just arbitrarily shuffling that. Oh, and so we do have a variety of comments, but Melanie, go ahead.
Yeah, the only problem I have is, as I discussed with you, Vic, with budget and finance, usually has to at least go first or somewhere in the top, because that has to be presented while stakeholders are still present to be very transparent.
Yes, I
It's
forgot to
important
mention.
for that to be at the top.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, that's one of the more basic nuts and bolts things we obviously absolutely have to get done anyway. And it also generally doesn't take an awful long time to do, so it would.
Right, so I think it's best to just get that out of the way while everybody's present, and then rearrange everybody else down at the bottom.
Yeah, I mean, that's just us
taken
basically
care of.
taking care of business and then getting on to the more meaty discussions.
I actually did do that, but I forgot to say it.
Okay, well, excellent. Do either of you know whose hand was up first? I looked over and there were 3 or 4 of them.
I know John Barbera was last, but other than that, I don't know the other 3.
Okay, I think, well, we'll go with Diana because she was farthest before. We'll get to Lori and Craig in a moment. Go ahead, Diana.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, I do have a problem with just randomly rotating them. I think that there was a discussion at an earlier meeting that perhaps the ones that had action items should be agendized ahead of ones where there was no action item. That's number 1. And number 2, sometimes action items are time sensitive, like the MND, and the ones relating to the port, for example, right now are very time sensitive. I'm holding a special meeting because I want to make sure that one of the other ones gets approved at this board. And so I think our stakeholders oftentimes are there because of actions that are being taken by the committees. And so just to say, oh, this one needs to go first because it's going to have the stakeholders there. It's hard to know which stakeholders are there for which items until they come up. So I think there's a variety of things you need to look at when you put the agenda together. And you may need to consult with some committee chairs along the way.
Well, it sounds, honestly, the more exceptions we come up with, the less positive and arbitrary shuffling sounds, because I think you're right that there will be things, and I, just from recollection, I know there are things that people show up specifically to hear about or to comment on. And so I think then it would probably be incumbent on committee chairs when they submit their reports, if there are action items like that, they should probably highlight and flag those as a higher priority. And I would imagine that the president would acknowledge that and act accordingly. And then if there are no exceptional requests for that kind of attention, that maybe we could just put everybody into a rotation otherwise. But then we have, things that take priority on a as needed basis, if that makes some kind of sense. So thank you for pointing that out, because that will be a very important part going forward. And there's like at least now 3 or 4 clicks to actually manage each speaker. Oh, I think I probably accidentally lowered Lori's hand. Lori, go ahead.
No, I lowered my own hand.
Oh, well, thank you. I see I'm doing so much clicking. I don't know what's happening.
I know, that's why you need one person to do this. It's hard to manage it all. So I agree with Diana wholeheartedly. And quite often when you're doing the agenda for the board meeting, you don't have all the information you need to know what order it's in. And you always, when you start the meeting, can say with no objection, we'd like to rearrange the meeting based on this, this, or this. Also, I encourage committee chairs wherever possible, if a motion is pretty self-explanatory, you've given the supporting documents, you can recommend that some items go on the consent calendar, which Diana has done in the past, and that saves a lot of time. And yes, youth and outreach used to get cut off, and I never get to do the homelessness liaison report. It's almost like, why am I here doing this? So that's a tad frustrating. But the thing I want to bring up too, at the last meeting, all of a sudden the chair of the meeting, 10 minutes to 9, said, okay, does anybody want to make a motion to adjourn? So it wasn't even 9 o'clock. We still had some reports and people that hadn't been called on. And everybody just wanted to get off the meeting. Now, we had the 9 o'clock cutoff because Peck Park closed. Okay, that's why we had it. With a Zoom meeting, the chair can say, we still have this many items to go, and do it maybe in 15-minute increments and say, is there no objection, we'd like to extend the meeting by 15 minutes, because it really isn't fair to people who are putting the work in, and the report is not shared. So it was very frustrating to have the meeting end last time with 10 minutes still to go, nobody discussing even an option. Everybody just wanted to get off the call. And I don't know, I don't think it's fair to all the people doing the work. So I hope you'll consider, again, consent calendar when you can. You can rearrange it the day of. You don't have to stress over doing the agenda in just the right order ahead of time. And please don't cut off the meeting and if people haven't given their reports. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. I think that's another good set of considerations to add. And again, just through the few years that I've been on the board, I've seen, I think it's a multifaceted approach. That is, presenters need to be, when you're presenting your committee's report, you need to be cognizant of how much time you're using, and if there's other people waiting, the people organizing and running the meeting should, give it the once over to see if there's anything that needs to or could get handled. Because in some cases, the committee reports that are often given the kind of table scraps at the end of the meeting could be dealt with relatively quickly if they were put at the front. So I think that might be kind of an inspiration for shuffling things, but everyone needs the time that they need. And I agree that we should probably opt toward or err towards using it all as opposed to using too little. But if we were to tally, I think we would see that some committees are more often shorted than others. So we should make some effort to balance that out, and keeping all those other things in mind, so that and I think what the notion that occurred to me on many occasions is that the committees that usually take the least time might be better put up front. If we can get something knocked out in just a couple of minutes, that ultimately serves, it gives us some breathing room. We know that we don't have people waiting, and maybe if another committee needs a bit longer, then we can go deeper into the conversation. But this is, not for one person to decide, and every month will be a little different. But I think we've heard a bunch of important input that we need to keep in mind when we do this, because, I think we can definitely do a better job of managing these than we have in the past. So I'm going to go to Craig. Go ahead.
Okay, one, motions and committee reports are two different things. We tend to, a lot of motions should stand on their own. Committee reports should just be brief reports on what happened to committee, not a bully session to get your motions passed. That's what's been happening. And it's one of the reasons why this goes on and on and on and on, is because motions, most boards, they have their motions, they're put out there. I have no problem with doing finances up front, because it's 1, 2, 3, and it's out of the way. But all our motions should be put up front, and committee reports should be on the end, and the divorce from the motions. People have motions, you make your motions, you discuss, you have input from the community, and then you discuss it in the board and you go on. It shouldn't be a committee. A committee should not be able to use that, committee chair, I should say, should not be able to use their report as a session to just have a discussion that nobody can talk back to about their motions.
No, I'm not. Oh, I don't know that it's outside of the realm established by the bylaws or the Brown Act, that when someone is presenting a motion, they speak in favor of what they'd like us to vote on, or they have some analysis of it. I can understand that sometimes that might take more time than people, like if I feel like I've personally got the gist of it and I'm ready to vote, that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone else does, or that the person describing this action item is done that. And so I think it would circle back to any speaker trying to keep in mind the time factor, but I don't think it's inappropriate. And I'd like to have other people sound off on this. I don't think it's inappropriate that if someone's presenting an action item, as thoroughly as possible, describe what it is that we're supposed to vote on. Although I would also ask that, board members do their homework and be at least passingly familiar with that when we go to sit down for the meeting. Let's see. Is John Barbera, go ahead.
Hi, guys.
There you go.
Well, I just got one thing to say. And, everybody's right doing what they're saying and this and that. But we do have one big problem. We tend to talk about certain items too much. We lag on to too much of one item. We just constantly go over it. That's where a lot of time's wasted. And you guys know what I'm talking about. We just, one person will say this, and another person comes into it, and then somebody else comes into it. And we just, our conversations on certain items, we'll spend 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes on something. And now we're trying to rush to get through the, our board, the agenda items and everything else. So, we need to either figure out, okay, we talked about it, it's been done in 10 minutes, let's move on. That's all I got to say. I mean, we need to look at that.
Thanks, John. Yeah, and I hesitate because I could be as impatient as the next person. Sometimes, again, I feel like I may have gotten the gist of whatever's being said. That doesn't mean I have, and it doesn't mean anybody else has either. I try not to let my own sort of patience or excitement about a topic be the throttle that everybody else has to, I wouldn't want us to have to move along because somebody feels like, it's been talked over, or that we shouldn't necessarily take all night if other people's, that balance is going to be hard to strike. And again, if everybody involved in the discussions is conscious of that, that is, maybe don't make a comment if what you intend to say has been said before or whatever. And those seconds and minutes do add up. But I don't think we should arbitrarily, sort of pre-manage any particular conversation beforehand. Sometimes these things require and deserve more time than others. It's just going to be always a judgment call on what that is. And I think it's something we have to do in real time. But the kind of input that we get during these things, I think it is valuable sometimes during an extended debate for somebody to say, hey, look, just to crack the whip a little bit and give us all the rest of, a reminder that it's been going on. Victor, and then we'll go to Doug.
Actually, Doug Epperhart was before me, so let him go first.
Okay, go ahead, Doug.
Okay, thank you. This is interesting. I sometimes think I should write a book called Best Practices in Running Neighborhood Council Meetings. Let me offer something that I have done for a number of years, and that I print out our agenda so that I have it on paper in front of me, and I grab my pencil, and when we take up an item, I note the time. And what that has allowed me to do is to figure out how much time are we spending on each motion? How much time are we spending on hearing from public safety officers? How much time do we spend on this, that, and the other thing? I mean, I can tell you, for instance, by going through these numbers at Coastal San Pedro, the controversial motion consumes about 20 minutes of our meeting. I can tell you that public safety officer reports typically chews up anywhere from 12 to 15 minutes. So this is a really good place to start in terms of time management. It is important to get your finance stuff done. I will reiterate that. I'll make one other comment. This was one of my failings, and I had Bob Gelfand to always remind me of everything I was doing wrong as chair. And one of the things he said that I think I really have taken to heart and learned is this: when you are chairing a meeting, you don't have to comment on everything that everybody says. Your job is to run the railroad, make sure the engines are running on the right tracks, but not to decide where they're going or, let the conductor know what kind of job they're doing. That consumes a lot of time. When you have fairly non-controversial items, and you'll see 5 board member hands and they're all saying, yeah, I'm in favor of it. It's okay as chair to say after the second or third one, is there anybody here who isn't, who is opposed or has an amendment or some other take? Because if all the hands are there to tell us that you're going to vote for it, maybe we can save 5 minutes. One other thing that I have done when I'm chairing our meetings, and I do this practically every month, and sometimes when I will get board members going on about a particular motion, I'll say, by the way, we have spent 18 minutes now discussing this motion. If the others take the same amount of time, we should be wrapping up about 11:30 tonight, just to let you know. Usually then I get a hand from somebody saying I called a question. So there's lots of ways to manage meetings and manage time, but I wouldn't necessarily start rearranging. If you have a committee chair and they have something important, all they have to do is say, can I ask that we take up my item next? Because I really have got people sitting here waiting to speak, and I'd like to make sure that we get to it and give it, the time that it needs. And you can do that without objection. So, but your board members need to be confident that they can do that. So anyway, those are my suggestions.
Well, and they're very good ones. But I think the idea of just I mean, it's just good science. If you're counting those minutes and then you look at the pattern, that will give you an answer. You know, some things will, maybe they'll drift more and some things will deserve that time, but I think it's good to be conscious of it so you can make an informed decision. Vic, you go ahead and make your comment. And then also, do you think is there a way that you think we could kind of build that into our meeting management?
Build which part? now?
Oh, the taking a note of when a particular item starts, you know. I was thinking in terms of minute taking, but that would complicate it if you have to refer to the minute taker all the time.
Well, I am no longer the official minute taker, so.
Well, right, yeah, which is what I meant. That it's like now that we have that kind of outsourced, referring to the minute taker for a time, or you know, I would think it might be natural for her to make a notation of when a particular thing started, but it would not necessarily be very fluid for us to go back and forth to get that information.
Could I just jump in?
Oh, sure, go ahead.
You have a Zoom recording of the meeting with an audio transcript.
Oh, that's right. Thank you. Yes.
So just
Which-
a note.
And it would obviously be faster to get that information that way. Anyway, it's time coded. So thank you, Doug. That's doubly helpful. So go ahead, Vic, with your.
Regardless of whether we reorder the committee reports, I agree that with what Craig was saying about putting the motions first. I don't know, I haven't been around long enough to know the logic behind why they are all together, the reports and motions in one place. I'm guessing it's just so the same committee can do their thing and then go on to the next committee and not go back to another, committee multiple times. But it makes sense both for the time constraint and for the stakeholders to do the motions first. So if the stakeholders in particular don't want to stick around for the report part, they will at least know that they're going to see the motions and what happens with the motions, and they won't miss that. So regardless of whether we reorder, standing committees, that might be a good idea to think about, is to put the motions up front to get them over with and have all the important stuff over with, because the motions are more important than a report.
Yeah, obviously that makes sense. And Diana, can you provide some perspective on that? Because I'm assuming you were around when made decisions about how these things were organized. Let me go ahead and click the appropriate buttons here. Go ahead.
Actually, I don't know if there was ever a discussion about how to do it. I think when the board started years ago, that's how it started and that's how it's always been. But I've often wondered myself why we did it that way and didn't, it's certainly possible to separate them. I did have my hand up. Should I speak now into why I had my hand up?
Yeah, well, it was your turn next anyway, so.
Okay, I just wanted to reiterate something that Doug had said. I think there's a tool that we don't use often enough, and that's the calling the question. When a discussion starts to just get repetitive, it would be really helpful if a board member would just would call the question.
I would tend to agree that, when I have seen it done, it does sort of, again, it's like a crack of the whip. And I think that their style has been to, as much as possible, allow people to say whatever it is that they've had to say, but there is like a law of diminishing returns in terms of multiple rounds of comment and back and forth, where we're not necessarily moving the ball, but we are running out the clock too. I guess that's a metaphor. But yeah, I think you're right. And, like any other function that we have, it's worth examining every once in a while. And if someone who has real history with the board doesn't know exactly why we're doing what we're doing, then that's a good red flag for us to say, at least test it. So would a discussion about whether or not or how to separate action items from reports, would that be something we should do here? Or this is just agenda setting, but so is this something we take to the full board for discussion and possible send it to bylaws or something?
It wouldn't need to go to bylaws because it's nothing in the bylaws or the standing rules, either one.
Oh, so it would just be an agenda issue.
I think what you may want to do is you may want to try it one time and see what you think.
Which I guess this would be the way to the place to set that up. Christian, go ahead.
We can try it on this one.
Yeah, I think that it's always good to experiment, and some of the suggestions given were good. I also think that it just takes time to get experience with this all around with any council member or any chair. There's always the opportunity to learn and grow. And I think that actually we're doing a pretty darn good job, but we have a lot to say, and oftentimes it could be repetitive, but I think we just have a lot to say in general. So not necessarily a bad thing, but we can just be mindful, I think, as we move forward.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think we have good discussions, and even good discussions, as I can tell you personally, will go on too long sometimes, but it's too much of a good thing. And, at least we're not throwing chairs yet. So I saw Pat and then Melanie. Go ahead, Pat.
Our one reaction to most of this discussion is it seems like it's board leadership, that the chair can kind of order the agenda so that you get the work done, early on while there's people there. Already has that power, and then during the speaking part, in the discussion and so on, there's tools that the chair would have to do it. So I'd rather I think you can leave it to the discretion and the judgment of the chair. One thing I have seen on some agendas, and Doug may have done this in his own, in coastal as well, is sometimes they put an estimate. The chair will put an estimate of the amount of time allocated to each of the agenda items to give people kind of a guideline. I think it's persuasive.
Yeah, and I mean, it seems like we keep circling back more or less to mindfulness and just really kind of keeping a hand on the tiller through the course of the meeting. But I think, yeah, well, if we were to decide now to experiment with a different format vis-a-vis the action items and presentations, how would we do that? And could we do it right now? Think about that for a second. Melanie, go ahead.
Well, I think I was going to head where you were going. What I think we need to do, honestly, is just be cognizant of how much time each item is going to take, and be cognizant of what the chair to be cognizant of the exact items. And if they're going into a lot of time of explaining, like if they're going around like 4 and 5 times the same person asking questions, at that point, don't allow that. You get a one go around and maybe a second go around to ask questions and call the question and get the vote. I think things will move quicker through the agenda if we do that instead of spending a lot of time on a lot of items, because there are some times where we get in this like big whirlwind where a couple of people are just asking a question after a question after a question after a question. And I think we need to put limits to that.
Yeah, and again, which does seem to circle back to it's really the discretion and the tone that the chair wishes to set for that meeting. And I've seen it done a couple different ways, and I've had a couple of different notions myself on what that might look like. I think it was Vic and then Christian.
Yeah, I'll just go first. So
Oh.
I think what we should do is finance. I'm totally fine with that going first. It's an important thing. We can put that first and then kind of look at what's coming in from the committees. And I think that we often see some committees tend to have a lot of action items, and in the past they have tended to go first or second, maybe after the executive report. Now in the future, if there are 3 committees, let's say, and they all have action items, then maybe we could put the one that used to go first more so, maybe that one would be okay to go second or third if they all have action items. And then, like we're saying, kind of move on to the committees that don't have any action items. And I think that's kind of what we do already, but I'll just give you an example of like a couple of meetings ago. I thought that our discussion on the Proud Boys event went on for quite a while, but in my judgment, I could see that people really liked to talk about it. And so when the community seems animated and enthused about a topic, that makes me want to give that topic some time, even though I know that there are other committees that might have to go next, because I try to read the community. And no one's perfect at it, but if the community seems interested in a topic, I think that they should be allowed more time to spend on it. And so even though I didn't really think we need to spend that much time on the Proud Boys thing, a lot of other board members did. And so I think that the judgment call on that was a good one. But it's hard. It's hard, and we're learning. And I welcome any suggestions during the meeting. Like some people said, hey, I think I'm going to have like 5 speakers on this item. You know, tell me beforehand, or tell us the weekend before, or even the day of, or at the beginning of the meeting. Let's move that up to the top, and I think we could easily do that.
Well, I think you bring up a very good point about the function and the purpose of the meeting, that sometimes, we must remind ourselves that it's for the public's benefit. And so, it's the sanctity of our process is not greater than the function of the utility of the meeting for the public. So, I think there's times when those things will kind of have their own gravity, but other times when we might need to, shuffle things along. But that's I think it's a very, very important thing for all of us to remember, is that we're not really here to make our pitch. We're not really here for our, our thing. It's like, unless and until it serves the community, sometimes we need to let the meeting be theirs as well. So, Vic, you were going to say?
Yeah, two things. One, as far as when we can initiate this experiment, we can do it for the next board meeting if you want. We can do it either way. We can use the we can keep the motions and reports together and then shuffle based on who has the most urgent or most action items, whatever you want to call it, however you want to, qualify it. We can separate the motions out, put them first, and put the reports later. We can do it either way. We can move it around. We've got the draft agenda. I can pull it up and we can move them around, for this next meeting if we want. Second thing is, as far as putting any type of time frame for particular agenda items, that is very strongly discouraged by Dunn, because if we put, say, 15 minutes for a particular item, and then we finish it in 5, because the public may think that it's going to go on for 15 minutes, and they are interested, say somebody's interested in the next item, they're going to think, okay, I've got 15 minutes, but then when they come in, it's already started or done because the previous one only took 5 minutes. So if we put a time frame on there, we have to wait that entire time frame before we can move on, even if we're finished, which is why I have not put them on the last few agendas. So I do not think that is a good idea. But as far as the, experimenting and shuffling, separating motions from reports, whatever, we can do that for the next meeting. We just need to decide how we're going to do it so we can shuffle them around.
I think they're saying leave the committees together, leave it all together, each committee. But if somebody submits like a lot of motions for like planning and land use, they go first and do all the planning and land use report and motions, and then just move them up depending on how many motions and action items they have.
Well, I think, Vic, that clarification from Dunn, I think I got that answer at some other point in the past when I asked a similar question. Why don't we just give everybody however many minutes? One, it's like, unless you give them equal time all the time, then you're making a value judgment in advance of the presentation of the thing, which isn't making sense. And it's kind of inherently unfair. And then, like, I believe the kicker was that you're more or less locked into that time until the thing goes. So it can be unnecessarily limiting. And then, So in terms of the executive board, I guess this is all of us present, does,
Chris,
what
we
are
do
your,
have one hand up.
oh, I'm sorry. You know what? That's one limitation. When you're looking at the participants panel, you can look at panelists or attendees, but not both at the same time. So you will miss hands sometimes. Go ahead, Douglas.
Yeah, with regard to what Vic was saying, and Pat had mentioned too about putting actual times on an agenda, I haven't done that in years. What we did at one point many years ago is we actually put a time certain to start taking up motions. And that was one way of sort of controlling, chewing up an awful lot of time with, questions and reports and so on and so forth. But what you can do during a meeting is if you have an item that you think might go particularly long, is a board member can raise their hand and say, I move that we allot 20 minutes, say, for this item. And then typically you can do a no objection, or if somebody wants to vote on it, you can vote on it. But then at the end of the, 20 minutes, if you want more time, you can add time. But if the board doesn't want to add time, then you stop the debate and you vote. So those are ways of controlling time during a meeting. And that's perfectly legitimate and does not run afoul of the new Brown Act rules.
Which sounds like yet another tool that the meeting chair would have at their disposal. And it's something that could be, I think it would be a good thing sometimes for other board members to suggest that it be done, or if the chair wants to take that initiative and sort of field that as a suggestion.
Although I
Yeah.
will tell you, it does not work when as chair you say, can I get a motion to limit this item to 1.5 minutes?
Well, yes,
Never works.
I think there's nice round numbers like 10 or 15 minutes that, give it some breathing room. But I mean, really having to sort of reconsent to continuing the discussion after, let's say 10 minutes might really be useful, because then you just have to make a conscious, you're not just waiting for your turn to talk, you make a conscious group choice as to whether it really needs to go farther or not. That seems, again, something that we should keep in mind as an option in the future. So thank you for that. For this particular issue of experimenting with the format, what are the other executive board members? What would your personal preference be? Personally, I'm interested in experimenting with separating the action items and the reports, if for no other reason than to see how much of how the presentation of the action items exists when we simply are there to describe the motion or whatever it is, and to get that going. Because again, I think there's a tendency, and this is kind of to take Craig's point, that these things tend to kind of mush together, where it almost morphs into a discussion that's a little bigger than it needs to be to describe the action item. So that's kind of what I'd be interested to see happen, but I don't know if it's necessary for the next meeting.
So
I
Chris,
agree.
would that mean that we would have, like, for instance, the port, if they had any motions, they would do them first and then be somewhere else on the agenda to do the report?
I think it meant that the all action items from all committees would have a block beginning or end or wherever, and that the reports themselves that were just sort of descriptive of the meeting activities other than the action items would be separate. So that essentially, let's say as chair of youth and outreach, I might present a motion at the beginning of the meeting when we're knocking out all the other action items, and then whatever else, if I'm going to talk about how Candy Cane Lane went, I would do that later on in the evening.
Okay, I see.
And so, I mean,
I
I think it's a way to make sure that everybody gets their necessary time, and it leaves breathing room for the kind of optional, more flexible stuff later. I mean, and, it seems a little clunky now, but I'd be interested in making a different mistake if that's what this is, just to see how it feels,
And Vic, on there for budget and finance, will be approving the MPG, what we decide to do for the MPG application, and then also approving the MPG reallocation of amount of money. So the amount will be decided at the board meeting or at the budget and finance meeting on Wednesday to request an increase of how much we aren't sure.
What was the first one?
And NPG application approval.
Okay, so the reason I brought this up is basically what we're talking about is, once it saves, is we would have essentially two sections. The first section would be the motions only. And the next section would be the reports only. And they would be separated like that. And then under each, major numbered bullet, we would have, this type of thing where we have sub bullets for each one. And for those that don't have motions, there just won't be as many sub bullets. So
I think that looks good.
that's the idea that Craig and Chris and I'll say now, I think would be a good idea to do.
Yeah, we can give it a shot, and if it's horrible, we can rethink it.
Well, yeah, we try it out, see how it goes, and modify as necessary. So I'll just leave those bullets in there for now, and then we that'll remind me to switch them around that way if that's the way we decide to go.
Cool. Yeah, I'm really grateful for all the quality input we had on this. I think it'll be, again, we'll do an experiment, kind of hit this thing with the hammer and see what falls off. It'll be good for, and again, I think it's good periodically just to sort of test our system and why are we doing this? Is there a good reason, or is it just habit? So that's excellent. All right, so we are at item number 5. Discussion and addition of agenda items for the January board and stakeholder meeting. Requests for consideration to date. Requests are accepted during this meeting that we are currently having right now. So do we have any suggestions or requests for additions to our agenda? See Melanie?
Yeah, I just, on number D, we need to discuss this. Christian, I talked to Ken Domi. He's more than willing to come to talk about the whole port stuff and all that at a port committee if he's given like advance notice and not 3 hours before the meeting or 2 hours before. But the presentation that he's wanting to do is his yearly update. He's not coming to discuss anything about the port or present anything like that. It's his yearly update that he does, his yearly presentation. And that's what he wants to do in January, this meeting.
Okay, I think that it would be a good idea to, and I was in communication, I said that if you can give us any supplemental documents beforehand so that if the public wants to ask any questions, they could formulate them over the weekend and then.
Right. The other thing he suggested was that we've got to remember with him, he is the public affairs person. He is not the expert in all of this stuff. And so anything that he says or does has to have someone come with him or have to get like a whole briefing that's given to him to answer questions. So he's not the authority on a lot of this stuff. He's their public affairs person. And so he just is the piece for Phillips.
There should be no questions, because if there should be no questions, and that's even better. Should I interpret that to mean that he's just going to present and then be done?
Exactly. He's bringing the tech person in case anybody raises their hand in the community to ask about that port thing. If anybody asks questions, there will be a technical person with him to answer those questions instead of him. Okay.
And that seems like it covers, I mean, well, I think as a stakeholder, obviously, if they want to come and make a presentation, we should entertain that. But if they're somehow prepared to answer these sort of, if they know in advance that he may be asked questions he's not personally
Right,
capable of
and I
fielding,
brought that
then
up to him and he said he'd bring the tech guy with him.
that sounds like a good solution for kind of all those things. And we can, I think it's also fair of us to request their participation at a committee meeting as well, where they can get into it a little bit better, but just not to have to do it all at the same time. Oh, and go ahead, Craig.
Yeah, am I there? Are you hearing me?
Yeah, you're there.
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry. So on these, reports, I mean, they're much, 20 minutes is much too long. I mean, if they can't give us a good report in 10 minutes and then, 5-10 minutes of questions, if you think about it, when you're talking about time, they get 20 minutes to talk. And then there's 10 minutes of questions. We're 30 minutes into the meeting. That's 3 hours. So if
That 20 minutes includes Q&A.
Yeah.
regardless, I mean, if we limited them to 10 minutes speaking, then you could say 10 minutes Q&A, but if they do a lot of this stuff, they just need to get down.
I'll say that I did ask him to bring it down to 10 minutes. So I'm going to expect that.
Well, that's fair. All right. Let's see. Are there any other suggestions or requests for a modification or addition to the agenda for the board and stakeholder meeting?
Other than the ones that are on the list?
Right. Well, yeah. Then the. Well, let's see. We covered item 5A. We covered 5B. I think 5C is not necessary, at least if it refers specifically to Zoom recording. That part of the function is pretty straightforward. As long as we remember to do it at the right time, we're good. We
Or
covered
do it at all?
Yeah, exactly. I guess if it doesn't. 5D is covered.
Here, let me hang on a minute. Here's where did I put it?
Diana has her hand up.
Go ahead with Diana.
Yeah, go Diana.
Am I unmuted?
You're good.
Okay. I assume that you meant, is there anything other than things that have come out of committee?
Right. I think
Okay.
that's what that means.
Just making sure you meant that, because yeah, we'll have a couple motions out of committee, but we haven't met yet, so.
Yeah, I realize that not everybody has met before this meeting, so there will be more that gets added.
Yeah, I thought it meant things that were otherwise being presented later.
But as far as the Zoom recording, this is what I had on the draft agenda.
Oh,
Not real
Well-
detail. I could go into the, more detailed, here's how you do a recording. But because I sent out that little instruction sheet to all the board members and committee chairs, I think I shouldn't have to do that.
well,
unless people are confused at what I wrote.
right. Well, no, I think you're right. There's no such thing as instructions that are too simple, because people miss those all the time. I think that's actually going to be very useful, because if someone isn't doing that type of data management all the time, they might not think of the difference between the cloud and their computer. But you might want to add, maybe parenthetically, record to the cloud, that is to specify that that's stored elsewhere, as opposed to, because I don't know. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is that you don't want to assume that people understand what the cloud is, or they could even theoretically be out using their phone. Dinah, did you?
Yeah, I was the big culprit because I had trouble doing this, but putting it on your agenda wouldn't help me at all. And I don't really think you need it on the agenda. I think it's more one-on-one tutorial to people who have trouble than it is something that's going to help by putting it on your agenda. And I think it just takes up time on the agenda that's probably unnecessary.
Maybe it could go in the executive committee report.
Well, it's the same.
I mean, this will take all of like 1 or 2
Well,
minutes unless we
yeah.
have questions, so it won't take long. We can put it committee report wherever, or I mean, executive or committee report.
Well, I mean, like, I think it's probably worth saying briefly once anyway. I mean, because it
And
will
why not
probably,
put it on our report for executive committee. Just a reminder to do this that came out of the executive committee.
yeah, it may not reduce the amount of time it takes, but I think it's worth it because it will hopefully prevent, more head scratching later on.
Yeah, but my problem was a technical one. Giving me this wouldn't have helped.
Yeah, and that's, if everything works the way you'd like it to, hopefully it's just a click of the mouse, but that's often not the part where it gets hung up. Go ahead, Craig.
Okay. Can it be possible because so that we get a training, or maybe we do a special meeting that's a training on how to use the Zoom? Because committee chairs especially could do. I mean, I need to know more. There's things that all of you didn't know you could do. Some of the stuff I played around with when I was running a meeting, but I don't have enough time to play around with stuff. So is there somebody that's much more familiar with Zoom and what we can do at the meetings?
It's a good question. I don't know. I mean, and it's funny to be asking these questions now, like a year and a half into this, when we've been doing it kind of, but you're right. There are functions because I just didn't need them. I didn't know that they existed. I don't know if anyone's a kind of a capital E expert or that we have necessary access to it, but I'll do a little digging, and maybe it's something that can be done as an email or whatever, but I'll do a little digging and see if there are any sort of, it could just be honestly a link to a YouTube video or something, but I'll see if there's something I can circulate that gives people those kind of FAQ solutions. And I don't know if Dunn, and I'll also refer to Octaviano and see if Dunn has anything that they sort of insist that we know, because that's
How much detail are you looking for? Is it more than just how to record?
No, I mean, I know how to record. It's just there's a lot of different, like you're saying, unless you go into subscreens, you can't find the things like where you mute people. And there's just some little stuff that you don't know. I mean, and if we knew them, it probably would have changed, how we were doing our meetings, and make it a little bit easier for us. But I mean, I've participated in Zoom meetings. I never ran a meeting. And when you run a meeting, it gives you a different perspective on it, and you're seeing it differently, and you're wondering, what can I do? What can I do? How to, even this where you're showing you're presenting we're viewing from your screen. How do you do that? I mean, I figured it out. I did it, but these are things that if we got cheat sheets on, or if we had a little tutorial, we'd know how to do it. Everybody could do it easily.
Well,
and it's a very good point that we were sort of required to do this, and there was never really any, I mean, we're just expected to learn it when we either showed up knowing or not. But at this point, not being able to say that we're not going to need this knowledge, for some length of time, I think, again, I'll personally see what I can come up with, and if other people have similar resources.
Doug has his hand up, but I can send out an email to the board and see what types of things they think would be good to know. Because I can do some of them. I'm not sure if I can do all of them. So
Wasn't there some video on Empower LA for a Zoom training at one point?
there might be.
I thought there was.
I'll do it while we're talking. I'll do a search and see if I can dig something up, because hopefully it would be that simple, but if not, then we can probably scare up the same type of information.
I
Go
know
ahead.
there are Zoom on the Zoom site tutorials, but they may go into too much detail for what we need. Anyway, I'm going to stop so Doug can talk.
Yeah, go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, just to point out, if you Google it or go to the Zoom website, there's tons of tutorials. And if somebody has time, you might want to take a quick look at some of them and perhaps send them to the board members and say, okay, here's the best tutorial out there. Or maybe you should even Google best Zoom tutorial and save yourself time. There are some really cool features that I think an awful lot of people don't know about. For example, when we were, getting 100 Pedro High students, my Vice President Dean discovered we didn't have to actually ask anybody to identify themselves because there is a feature that will allow you to get a list of everybody who's attended the meeting, along with their email addresses and how long they were on the meeting.
Oh, man.
Yeah, I know. And I can forward his email explaining how to do that if anybody's interested. But I'm like, damn, why didn't you figure this out a year ago, dude?
We kept expecting for it to be over, right?
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, I would check out the online tutorials because there really are some very cool features that you probably wish you knew about a year ago.
Thank you. Yes, yet again, good input from Doug. Go ahead, Vic.
And Doug, that what you're talking about, I recently basically scrounged around all the Zoom menus and found out how to get the list of, who attended, who they said they were, how long they were on, if they were on and off and on and off again, that as well, and that sort of thing. So as well as I found out how to get the list of what was typed into the Q&A.
Oh, wow.
And whether it was whether particular ones were responded to or not, and what the response was and stuff like that. So I only found that out myself recently. So we can do that. If people need to know some of that, we can, write up a little cheat sheet on that or whatever.
I think that would probably be helpful. And I mean, honestly, given that kind of information, the functionality built into this, I'm almost hoping that there's some long-term use of this type of technology for our meetings. There's a lot of things that questions get answered and things that we'd like to be able to keep track of, that, not to mention the fact that it allows more people to attend the meetings and participate. There's just kind of too much good information to think that this tool is not going to be available to us for much longer. Anyway, so is that the extent of our discussion on items 5A through E? Oh, actually, not E was not handled. So where are we on I'm sorry, item 5E? Or is there any necessary?
I don't know if that is coming back to the board this meeting or not. I assume it is, since I think the comment period ends between this board meeting and the next one. That's probably, I believe that's in the port committee right now, but I'm not positive, and Pat has his hand up.
Oh, good.
I think that it's a good idea for us to take that item up, so I think we should take it up.
Okay, go ahead, Pat.
Vic, you're right. The comment period expires shortly after the board meeting on the 10th. I think it may be the 13th or 19th, something like that. So this will be the last opportunity for the board to act before the comment period ends. Now, I'm prepared to discuss it or answer any questions you might have. I think Diana, you can answer on whether it's on the planning agenda also, and that assumes, of course, that there's a quorum.
I think we should
Go ahead. The easiest thing is just to send it onto the board. I mean, how it gets there, I don't think matters a whole lot. It certainly doesn't matter to me. We'll have to explain it at the board anyway.
And just to clarify, this is the one that was tabled at the last board meeting, correct?
Yes,
But he
So it has
revamped the
already
letter,
gone-
but still.
No, I know, but it has already been heard.
Yeah, so we can just untable it, a motion to untable it, and then the board can
Right.
discuss it again.
Right, that's why I wanted to bring that up.
Go ahead, Diana. Hmm.
Diana, you're up. You need to
I'm click-
unmute.
I'm clicking unmute. Is that something she can see? That's one of the things I don't know is, okay, there you go.
Oops, I forgot to hit the unmute, or I
Okay.
missed it. I missed it, actually. I tried to hit it. I wanted to point out that it has been changed since it came before the board before. The reason it was tabled was to allow time to get more information and to have a more complete report. It is on our agenda for tomorrow night, but it was only there as a fallback in case you felt it needed to go back to a committee, but otherwise, I'd prefer to see it just go back directly to the board and have the board take it off the table and act on it.
I agree.
That makes sense. It sounds like we're have consensus on that issue. And thanks again for the amount of work that goes into making things like that happen. It's really, it's an important value added feature of our board that I don't think everybody's enjoys. And I think can maybe take it a little bit for granted around here because it's been so consistent, but it's not nothing for sure.
I did have one other thing,
Yeah, go ahead.
and that had to do with the motion that was on the consent calendar last time for the to authorize the president, I believe it was, to request a 90-day extension on, and it was taken off the consent calendar, but I don't think it was acted on, was it?
Yeah, we acted on it.
You did act on, okay. When I reviewed the draft minutes, I didn't see it, but maybe I just missed it.
Yeah, Diana, that's the one where we took, I believe it was 6.e out
Yes,
and did all the rest of the consent calendar together. And then immediately after that, we did the 6.e by itself.
okay.
And also, as far as your Q&A, I assume you were talking about typing up the list of attendees.
Yeah, how to get the list of attendees at a meeting and their email addresses, and how to get the Q&A, the script for
Oh,
the Q&As.
As
Yeah,
far
those
as-
two things you had mentioned, it would be very helpful. I have asked Dunn, I don't know how many times, repeatedly, how do we get the email addresses of the attendees? And they've never been able to tell me. So if
They
you figure
probably
it
just
out,
did.
that would be great.
Yeah, they probably just didn't know like the rest of us.
Well, in my opinion, it's not in an obvious place. So, I had to look all over the place to find it, and I finally did. But to me, it's not intuitive at all as to where it is. I mean, when you look at where it is, it sort of makes sense, but it really, in my opinion, should be somewhere else.
And it's
But-
not necessarily a function that everyone's going to need just because you're running a meeting. I think, for a series of meetings, or if you're going to, kind of crunch numbers, I would think so. But just I think because you have like a workload issue, whoever's running a meeting is probably participating and, got plates to spin. Doing all of that stuff might not, when they were designing the product, they might not have thought it was a priority to put it where you could get to it.
It's not something you need in real time. It's
Yeah,
something you have to-
exactly.
Right.
So I think what I'm thinking of, unless the committee chairs think that they all want it, which I kind of hesitate to say that, but they might, is if somebody, I can give the option, basically say, here, we have this ability to do this. If you need it for your meeting, let me know. And I can get it out there.
Well, I think that makes sense.
Everybody
Though.
will need it.
If you do it by
I would just-
request,
I would just like to know how to get the names and email addresses of everyone that attends the meeting. So if you could just give us that instruction, that would be helpful. And I
This is
also
something-
like to be able to go get whatever is on the Q&A, because sometimes I've had students put stuff in the Q&A and then I've turned off the computer and realized I didn't get it out in time.
It's, I believe where that sort of thing is located is going to be something that only the Zoom administrators have access to.
I thought so.
So it's gonna be, if you need it, let us know and we can get it for you, or me.
Okay. Okay,
Which is fine.
that's fine. Thank you.
Craig has his hand up too, so we need to
Yeah,
let him.
I see. Go ahead, Craig.
Okay, it's some of the stuff is that we also need to know is, there's different formats for having meetings. When I'm on this format, all I could do is see who's the board members who are present. I can't see Christian. I can't see who else is there. When I'm in a board meeting, I can see everything. And we maybe there's got to be other options for displaying that would allow people to see more. And, I know Dunn recommends certain things and doesn't recommend certain things, but that is obvious. They don't know a lot of things about this venue either. And I would like to see, that we might want to look and see if there's other ways we can display stuff so people can see more and understand what's going on. Because I have no clue who else is here.
Yeah, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think that is like a basic structural organization of Zoom. That's the distinction between panelists and attendee. And I don't know if that's something we can change, but that is worth looking at to make sure, like, to be able to tell people. Yeah, Melanie's shaking her head no, but it would be good to know, to be able to tell people that as an attendee, here's what you can and can't do, and X, Y, and Z. But you bring up the issue of format, because if people are attending or participating from their phones, it's going to look very different. If you're telling people to click here, then that spot is not going to be the same on their screen. So that the functionality part of it is going to keep coming up as a priority. Go ahead, Vic.
Lori was first, so I'll let her go.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, this is again, click over to attendees and there's Lori. Go ahead, Lori.
Thank you. So I attend a lot of Zoom meetings during the week. I mean, probably average about 10 a week at least. There are some things you can control in the settings. My understanding is when we got the license, the Zoom license from Dunn, they either set some settings. Yes, they have some protocols that attendees are not visible. And as an attendee, when I attend the board meetings, I can see only the people on the board who choose to show their video. I can't even see the names of panelists who do not show their video, which is why I imagine we don't see Christian. Okay, so there are some things you can change when you set up the meeting in settings, but you might want to check because this is a Brown acted Zoom meeting. So I don't know if Dunn put some kind of established protocols in the settings. Some neighborhood councils been able to work around them. In regular meetings that I manage outside of here, I can see the panelists, I can see the attendees. And Chris, you should be able to see both at the same time. And they have a feature up there that tells you if there's any hands raised, whether they be panelists or attendees. So you might want to check what you're seeing.
Oh, well,
But-
and I may have to dig, because again, if I'm not signed in as the administrator, so I'm sure there's probably, I know there are more functions.
No, that's not it. I'm sorry. It's whoever the host and co-host are. Okay, this has to do with that. The administrator is the one who has control of the settings. Now, I
Right.
don't know. I think after you've created a meeting, like let's say Vic created a meeting, I think he can still change the settings. Okay, but only the administrator can do that. But once you're in the meeting, anybody who's a host or a co-host can control these things. So yes, it is a little frustrating that when I'm as a stakeholder watching the board meetings, I have no idea how many attendees there are. And the fact that I can't even see board members who do not show their videos, which they are not required to do. That's a personal choice. So I'm not sure who you're, I guess, Vicky, are you the one, you and Christian, the administrators, you might want to look at the settings and talk to Octaviano and see if, because you're using a license through them, if there's some restrictions. Zoom has come a long way because of COVID, and they do updates all the time and add new features. So there might be some changes to the settings.
Yeah, I would not be surprised if there's things that the city asked for when they contracted for Zoom to, to head off certain kinds of organizational problems. But yeah, I would also not be terribly surprised if they didn't explain to us exactly what those were, but that would be worth a email to Octaviano to see if there's any sort of,
Chris,
favorite.
part of the
And
problem
there's,
is-
I'm sorry, there were trainings for Zoom through Done. Okay, and I believe, I didn't take the time now to look, that they set some of those up as tutorials on their site, but I think you and Vic were going to take a look at that. They did do quite a bit of Zoom training back at the beginning, but
Yeah, and I
they have
found,
changed since they did their training too.
yeah, and I found those on the Empower LA website. If you just, if anyone does a Google search for or any search engine of your choice for Empower LA Zoom training, it'll take you to a pretty robust section, but it's also not the sort of thing that'll help you get started quickly. So I can understand how a simplified set of tools might be more useful for us.
And Chris, if there are options, then I think your executive board should talk about what the options are and then bring it to the board and say, do you want to see this or that? As a board member, I was always a co-host, so I don't know. Can board members who were not co-hosts, can they see who the attendees are?
I think if you're a panelist, you can see everyone, and
Okay.
if you're not, then you can't.
Okay.
Part of the problem too, Chris, that we're facing is that the way that we have to set up our meetings with Zoom, like when I set up Zooms for other stuff that I'm doing, I can do a regular Zoom meeting and they can see everything and see everyone, and everybody that's on it can see everybody. We have to do what's called a webinar, is the way that Dunn has us set up. And the webinar has a lot of restrictions with it, where the attendees are not seen and the panelists are the only ones that are seen. And it really kind of puts us in a situation where we're kind of handicapped from the regular Zoom.
Well, it makes sense because, professionally, for instance, I've done Zoom meetings with a small number of people where we're all there on a more or less equal footing. A webinar is intended to be more of a broadcast situation where you're, you have a panelist and you have essentially an audience, but that's also not the same environment that we have for a committee meeting where you may have a relatively small number of people. And I think our expectations from one experience to the next, we're not necessarily conscious of why we were expecting one thing or another, but the rules were probably put in place for good reason, but without directly referring to those things. Yeah, Victor, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing that Melanie said. In Zoom, there are things called meetings and things called webinars, and they definitely have different abilities and features to them. And Dunn has recommended / strongly encouraged / virtually required that we use the webinar. I've also noticed while I've looked around that there are some settings that are locked, that I believe were locked by Dunn when they, installed the license or however they did things. There are some that we can change. There are some that we cannot. So and that's in the process of scheduling a webinar. Once it is scheduled and it's started like this one, then there are things that we can control, but not, I haven't compared one-to-one, but it's not all the different settings that are available when we actually schedule a webinar. So that's the reason why you can't see everything as an attendee and things like that. I believe one of the reasons for using webinars for this instead of meetings, I'm not positive that this is correct, but I believe what they said was that you can control the attendees speaking and not speaking with a webinar, whereas with a meeting, I don't think those controls exist, and everybody, like Chris said, is pretty much on equal footing, can unmute and mute as they wish, and there's not really any control over it. Now, I could be wrong with that because it's been a while since I heard it, but I think that's the reason.
And then that would tend to make sense. I mean, I think trying to think of it in terms of Zoom's, building and managing a product, it's software, so they could make it do literally anything. But if the city needs it for a particular function and they're contracting for, I'm sure, a huge amount of money, they're probably going to ask for certain things baked in to make sure that they, that they can have some consistency and reasonable expectations based on what they would reasonably expect for in-person meetings to carry over. So I think I'll email Octaviano, just see if he has any sort of like a short list of, but you're right. And personally, I assumed that webinar meant the same thing as meeting just because it was being presented in the same context. It's obviously very useful information that they are not. So that's good to keep in mind. All right, well, do we feel like we've covered, yeah, it looks like we've gone through item 5 and all its subsections pretty well. Is there, is there anything else? Do we feel we've got it all? If so, then I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move.
I second it.
Okay, moved by Melanie Lebrecq and seconded by our president, Christian Guzman. Thanks, everyone, all of our panelists and attendees. I think this was a very useful, I love a good nuts and bolts session where, if not solutions, we find out like a set of tools to go after some good tasks. So I think this was very valuable, and I wish they could all be this impactful. Thanks, everyone. And if not sooner, then I will see or speak with you at our next board and stakeholder meeting.